Katie. I thank Congressman Farr for the opportunity to moderate today's panel. I'd also like to thank the Congressman and his office for their deep interest in the region. We have an incredible pair of speakers today who I will introduce shortly after I briefly mention the context for today's discussion on the state of cartels in the region. In my own work, I have concentrated on cartels or drug trafficking organizations in Mexico because that has been the locus of congressional interest given Mexico's proximity and close ties. Today, we'll be getting a broader picture about organizations operating in countries throughout the region. In my own work, I have, just briefly on Mexico, there's been significant fragmentation. In 2000, there were really 4 major cartels. And I've seen compelling evidence that now there are 9 to 11 well-established drug cartels and some 40 other local gangs that acting as enforcers associated with the major cartels, although those affiliations can change. The fragmentation of drug cartels occurring in Mexico, some say spurred by the drug control strategy of the prior Calderon administration, has been matched by an increasing diversification of the Mexican criminal groups into other types of crime, such as carjacking, murder for hire, resource theft, extortion, and kidnapping. The very sort of common crime that hits the Mexican public the hardest. Eduardo Guerrero, a Mexican analyst who follows crime inside Mexico, estimates there were some 8,000 organized crime-related homicides last year. While the 2014 statistics are down from the prior year by about 3,000 homicides, according to his data, Guerrero notes that the level of violent crime in Mexico is still quite elevated. There are particular hotspots, such as the border state of Tamaulipas, in the central western Mexico, especially the states of Guerrero and Michoacan, and the central state of Morelos. I read yesterday that Cuernavaca is very hard hit, which wasn't the case. Yeah. The current Peña Nieto administration has been struggling with its security strategy in recent months following the disappearance and suspected murder of 43 students in Guerrero. While the current government has had many important takedowns of prominent cartel figures, notably the arrest of El Chapo Guzman of the Sinaloa organization about a year ago in Mazatlan, and head of the largest cartel in Mexico, there remain some stunning challenges. According to Guerrero, some of the cartels have moved to less urban parts of Mexico, where they operate with more discretion and where local governments and even civil society institutions may be weaker. While there has been a decrease in some crime indicators, such as the homicide rate and debatably kidnapping, that's what Guerrero reports, but others report there's been an increase. Many cartels are continuing to operate and have become firmly entrenched by using corruption and intimidation. Now let's turn to the speakers with some brief bios. Adam's going to go first. I've known Adam for about 20 years. And, no, I'm dating us. He is an expert on regional security policy. Adam is at the Washington Office on Latin America, WULA, where he shares his expertise on civil-military relations, U.S. security assistance into the Americas, and on topics of defense. Adam spent 14 years at the Center for International Policy. He holds degrees from Yale and Hampshire College and has a very lengthy list of publications. Adam is also known widely as a leading expert on Colombia. I frequently tap his expertise on Colombia, which I also cover for Congress. We also have the pleasure of hearing from Dr. Maria Velez de Berliner. Dr. Berliner is the president of the Latin Intelligence Corporation. She is an expert on transnational terrorist, criminal, drug trafficking, and human trafficking organizations. Dr. Berliner also has a lengthy list of publications and is an educator. She has been recognized with awards from the U.S. Air Force Special Operations School and is an adjunct professor at the George Washington University and a professor at the Security and Intelligence Academy in Reston, Virginia. I'll turn it over to Adam.
And I'll go stand up.
Right.
Thank you, Jan. We're on here? Okay, good. And thank you all for coming out. This is an excellent turnout, and I hope we can make it worthwhile. And I'm going to try to do this in 15 minutes. What I do want to talk about is just to give you sort of the 101 overview of what the picture of cartels or for organized crime looks like in Latin America right now. I'll talk about some recent trends. If time allows, I'll talk about some of the recommended strategies for dealing with the problem. If time runs out, I will sit down and maybe talk about that in question and answer. Let me clear that at the outset too. I'm going to say some things that are sort of general. When you're talking about organized crime, there's always going to be exceptions. There's always going to be minority cases or outliers. Just to take that as given, and the whole yes but thing I'm going to have to skip because we don't have that much time. But what are we talking about when we talk about cartels? It's not in the sense of, a cartel is defined as a group of people that sets to fix a supply of something. And yes, that is something that we're talking about here, but it's larger here. I think what Representative Farr rightly wanted to talk about is organized crime in all of its forms in Latin America. And organized crime, and there's always been organized crime, smuggling happening in Latin America, really since, for hundreds of years. It has intensified in violence and in the amount of money involved since the 1970s and 80s, largely because of the illegal drug trade. Now I'm going to put these current groups in a few categories. There's a lot of slippage between the categories, obviously, but just to get a sense of it. First, there's your more pure narcotics-based production and transshipment organizations. Not really the cultivators. The people growing opium poppy or marijuana or coca tend to be peasants who are independent operators, their families quite often, and they're not the big cartels. The big money in the drug trade is in transshipment, getting it especially out of the source zone and to the United States, especially for instance with cocaine between the Andes and your neighborhood. In the 1980s, the Medellin and Cali cartels, there's Pablo Escobar and the Rodriguez Orejuela brothers, they had that locked up. They were taken down by the 1990s, and now really the center of gravity is with Mexican traffickers. June just mentioned the 9 to 11 groups. You can read the small print from this map from Stratford. There's a list of some of those groups there. It's many more. But the big money now is in the hands of the Mexicans, who are the intermediaries between the drugs coming from the Andes and from the United States, or the drugs like marijuana, heroin, and meth, which I'll talk about later, that are actually produced in Mexico. There's other groups around the region that are focused heavily just on moving product. There's the so-called transportistas in Central America, which are sort of family cartels. That's a great map from Insight Crime about the main transportistas in Guatemala. And that includes Mexico's Zetas, the orange one, but everybody else there is a family group. There's so-called narco-trafficking clans in Peru and Bolivia. There's narco-traffickers who run the slums in Jamaica. Colombia still has pure narcos, guys like Marcos Figueroa and others who are not members of armed groups. Venezuela has what they call the Cartel de los Soles, the cartel of the sun, because generals in Venezuela have suns instead of stars on their shoulders. And the military, if it's not trafficking actively, is playing an important role in facilitating and mediating between the groups that are moving about 250 tons of cocaine through Venezuelan territory every year. Now, these groups are often rather popular. The ones that are just narco-trafficking, or mostly narco-trafficking, are rather popular in their home base areas because they're very populous. They spread the wealth around. They curry favor. They kind of substitute for a lack of government in a lot of places that they're in control. Barrio Pablo Escobar in Medellin. Escobar threw a lot of money into housing projects and soccer fields. Nowadays, if you're in western Honduras or in Sinaloa, Mexico, the narcos may be throwing you parties and festivals for your town on a regular basis. If you need a quinceañera dress, you might go to the local narco and see if they can pony up something. Now, this first group claims to be involved just in narco-trafficking, even if they're shading off into other crime. You can't read the lettering on this sign, but this is a picture purportedly of the Sinaloa cartel in Nuevo Laredo, and the sign says, "We're here to do away with the Zetas. Don't join the Zetas because, unlike us, they do other things besides narco-trafficking. They get their hands dirty by extorting people, and we're honest narco-traffickers," it says. Now, there's another set of groups that are certainly proliferating that are diversified. Yes, they deal and transship drugs, but they're also involved in a lot of crimes. Two categories. First, the kind of crimes that where both the buyer and the seller have an interest in hiding what is going on. Counterfeiting, contraband smuggling, migrant smuggling, illegal mining, arms trafficking, siphoning fuel out of pipelines, prostitution, illegal gambling, illegal public works contract, and of course, laundering all the proceeds from all of the above. There's another, which is a category, which are the kinds of crimes where the victim would denounce it and would try to get something done about it if they could do so without retribution. Extortion of small businesses, medium, large businesses, kidnapping for ransom, human trafficking, car theft, cell phone theft, and of course forced recruitment of kids into these groups. This sort of crime hits the population hard. It harms very much the popularity of these groups. They're more feared and hated than the wealthier, purer narco organizations. Now there's an offshoot or a variant of these diversified groups, which is armed groups, actual armed groups that claim some sort of political identity. Oh wait, I'm not up to those yet. Just other examples around the region. Fooled myself with my own slide. The blue on the map of Colombia's territory are these so-called criminal bands, which can trace their roots to the paramilitary groups, pro-government paramilitary groups that formed in the 80s and 90s. In Brazil, diversified groups include the First Capital Command and the Red Command. Mexico's so-called poorer cartels, the ones that are not just narco-trafficking, include many, the Zetas, the Knights Templar, the Guerreros Unidos, the Gulf Cartel, and others. Sinaloa can be involved in non-drug activity, but as they don't mess with it as much, the areas they control tend to have less violence right now because of the monopoly they have. An increasingly common model, and I love this map of the Urabeños Colombian criminal group, put together by Jeremy Dermott at Inside Crime, is one you see in a lot of places. In a local area somewhere, usually a strategic area for trafficking, there is a militia whose focus is criminality, not politics. If they want political power, it's just to make their business happen. And the reason this is interesting, I mean, they look kind of like an army when they're in the countryside. When they're in the city, they look a lot like a street gang. But in the purple core there, I found this interesting, there's always some sort of command structure. Some commanders who have a very low profile, we often just know what their alias is in that local area, who controls things. And he names several that are in charge of different areas. They control a key corridor for trafficking. A corridor, or in Mexico, they often call it a plaza for trafficking. And I like how one of some of these main corridors in the green there, Jeremy put the FARC's 57th Front as one of the main partners or units of the Urabeños because they control the corridor in northwest Colombia going out by the Panama border. Now, controlling a corridor means having all local government in their pocket or intimidated by them if they're not in their pocket. So they don't do anything about what their trafficking activities. The police, the justice system, the local brigade of the military, certainly the mayor and maybe even the governor. But usually no control, because they're local, usually no control over the national government. What's going on in the capital, people in the capital may actually be working to try to take them down, and that local group does not want to attract their attention. In Colombia, they have taken down a lot of members of the BACRIM, the criminal bands, but almost always, I think every time, it's always been a unit deployed from Bogota that had to do the job, not anybody local. They could even identify or notify the locals that it was going on. These groups all also tend to have some connection to an international trafficking network, some go-between or some link. For instance, in Colombia, the Urabeños will have many links to the Mexican cartels that are their partners in getting the stuff, the product north. But the Mexican cartels are getting most of the money. Now, the variant that I meant to talk about before are those that have some sort of political identity, and maybe even a history of being a political group that still support themselves through criminality. Colombia's FARC and ELN, it's much easier to get pictures of FARC leaders these days because they've been involved in peace talks with the Colombian government for the past 2.5 years. The remnants of Peru's Shining Path would fit in this category. Paraguay's first popular army to some extent. Some of these groups have a long history. They weren't involved in the illicit economy to begin with. Now, and they're also more recognizably military. They have uniforms, insignia, some sort of command structure. They tend to have worse relations with the state. It is much more dangerous for a local politician or police commander or somebody to be in league with them because the central government will come down on them very hard. So they don't have the luxury of having everybody in their corridor bought off. They tend to have to push them out. And for them, they have acted in a predatory way against the state, or rather against the people, and it has hurt them in their popularity. The red is, over the last, since 2000, Gallup's disapproval rating of the FARC among the Colombian people, and the green is the approval rating. It's hard to actually maintain a political movement when you're that unpopular, and for the FARC, I think the drug money has ended up substituting for the lack of popularity. The last category of groups that we should mention here are street gangs. Essentially, especially in the most notorious ones are in Central America, Mata Salvatrucha, Barrio 18. The ones in Central America actually started mostly in the United States among the Salvadoran and Central American communities in Los Angeles. But every major city in Latin America has something that looks like this. Not as regimented, but gang activity in poor neighborhoods is pretty universal and very locally focused. Now, these groups are not trafficking large amounts or transshipping large amounts of drugs and getting enormous profits. They're more involved in micro-tráfico, selling small amounts on the street corner and controlling territory to sell the drugs to the local population in the neighborhoods they control. But they're not really international players, although they may be used as muscle or as hitmen by some of those first groups. They're very territorial. They operate neighborhood by neighborhood. They're very violent and predatory. That violence is a big reason why we saw that big flood of children coming from Central America to the United States last year. But they're also born and bred in their neighborhoods. They're known, their parents are known, and often they'll provide the only option for youth in neighborhoods where the majority of people between 15 and 25 neither go to school nor have a job. Now, some similarities between them. On the ground, especially in urban areas, they kind of can look quite similar. This is a picture from Brazil, Rio. Mostly young people. One phenomenon you hear a lot about in urban areas are invisible boundaries between neighborhoods that people simply can't cross without getting shot because the control over individual neighborhoods is so strict. Close control over the comings and goings of the people in those areas, marking their territory with graffiti, setting up extortion rackets and being able to extort small businesses, sometimes even the person out front selling like quesadillas or cell phone minutes on the street. Certainly, of course, bus companies and others get extorted widely. Leaders and founders who are often in jail, they're constantly in touch with their foot soldiers. Taking advantage of vacuums in the state. That's geographical, like this favela here, where the police rarely enter, but also institutional vacuums, where the justice system, the police, other state services are completely corrupted by the gang that's in charge. So, filling in those vacuums of state presence or institutional presence. Now, every group I've talked about doesn't actually thrive on violence. They don't want to be in a war zone all the time. That's not so good for business. And they know that too much extortion or mayhem draws unwanted attention from the national government because it's not as much in their pocket. They'd rather do business in peace, but things get out of control when there's competition. The only way competition gets settled usually is by violence or a pact, which is usually unstable. And there's always competition. It can be external rivals, it can be external splits, but competition is going to happen. But sometimes you'll see like an interregnum of peace, a pax mafiosa, if you will. Usually it's the result of one group enjoying a temporary monopoly over an area, or two or more groups entering into some sort of pact. The four cities up here, Medellin, Sao Paulo, Ciudad Juarez, and Tijuana, not always, but right now have a homicide rate that is equal to or less than Baltimore's. They're relatively peaceful. Now, in these cities, extortion hasn't changed. Everyone has to pay up to some group. Recruitment of children, of minors, is regular. Drugs are flowing like crazy. I've asked the Border Patrol in San Diego if they're seeing any decrease in drugs flowing from Tijuana since the Orange Line went down. No. In fact, they've seen a tripling of heroin seizures since 2010. But it's predictable for people who live there. The criminality is predictable. You know who to pay off, and no one else is going to come and pick you up also. You could probably even go outside at night. The bars and restaurants reopen. Don't mistake these periods of calm for miracles of good governance. There may be improvements in governance in these areas. In fact, a local government and police could be doing things right, but things just don't improve that fast on their own. Institutional improvements take time. That's a big policy recommendation there. In Medellin, you see interregnums, the blue line of peace, visible in the homicide rate. You saw a lot of articles about this amazing miracle in Medellin in 2006, 2007. In 2008, the guy who controlled criminality in Medellin, former paramilitary leader, got extradited to the United States, and the competition just shot right up again. Notably, each time that it's shut up again, not as high as before. And that is where you can probably measure the difference in better governance, but not those sharp, sharp drops. That always goes to something else. I won't talk about Juarez, Tijuana, and Sao Paulo, but for one at a time. But these equilibria, when you see that interregnum that Pop Mafioso, that's inherently unstable. It can change in a moment. Internal schisms happen or external rivals come and the violence flares up again. Now, how much time do I have? About 5? Okay, just, okay. So I'm just going to talk about recent trends and we'll just give recommendations to a later discussion. Violent crime rates rose in a big way in a lot of countries in the last 10 years. In the last 2 or 3, they seem to be starting to level off. Mexico, even Honduras, has seen some drop in the last couple of years. Some of that is due to government response against organized crime. Some of it is simply accommodation between groups, and it's hard to say how much of which is which. El Salvador, the green line there, note that drop and then the rise again. That was the gang truce. In 2012, the church, with the government's permission, brokered a truce with the 2 main gang leaders. It said, if you behave better, we'll let your leaders have easier jail conditions. You can hold these kind of press conferences and stuff if you want. Homicide rates went down pretty significantly. Extortion didn't. Disappearances went up. So in popular opinion, people said, hey, you're giving these guys a nice time in jail. They get to go on TV, but my small business still has to pay. What's going on here? And it became very unpopular. It ultimately collapsed with the change of government, and the rivalry heated up last year, and homicide rates shot back up. Another trend, when confronted by the state, they tend to fragment. Top-level takedowns, like Chapo Guzman here, and that chart there shows, if you can read it, which cartels in 2004 from Guerrero's article had the most capos or placeholders taken down. And Sinaloa is in 3rd place behind Gold Cartel and the Knights Templar. When you take out the top leader, it creates competition between mid-level leaders if there's no clear succession. I shouldn't have put the picture of Chapo, actually, because that is a group that has a much clearer succession and sort of network structure. Amayo Zambada seems to be filling the shoes, and there's a lot of autonomy given people in the group. The FARC is another one where they've killed a couple of their leaders, top leaders, and then they've simply put someone new in their place, and nothing happened. But a lot of cartels, yes, do fragment. That's a map of Guerrero, where the 43 students were disappeared by the police and an armed group back in September, and it's a patchwork that is constantly changing. The Zetas, the Gold Cartel, the Beltran Leyvas, the Familia Michoacana, a lot of infighting, the emergence of new groups in some areas, like the Guerreros Unidos, Nueva Generación Jalisco, the Viagras, come on, Independent Cartel of Acapulco. You got the example of Colombia after the AUC also, after the paramilitary is demobilized in 2006, when new groups shot up. Now they seem to be consolidating under the Urabeños again, but it's a hydra. You take out a head, a bunch of new ones grow in its place. Another trend in the US-bound drug trade, it's worth mentioning the rise of meth and heroin and the decline of cocaine and marijuana according to seizure statistics. Cocaine use has been declining in the United States for at least 10 years now. Most of it's going to Europe and often to Brazil, the #2 consumer. Marijuana seizures at the border are down quite a bit also. Some news coverage claims that may be because of legalization and decriminalization in the United States, simply sucking the profits out of it. Could be, hasn't been really studied yet. Mexico, though, has become a big producer and transshipper of these high-profit, smaller volume drugs that are easier to conceal. Methamphetamine, heroin, prescription opiates. Now, in 2009, 14% of U.S. heroin consumed in the United States was made in Mexico. Now it's half. That has grown enormously fast. In 2009, and maybe a little more now, the UNODC said that total consumption of heroin in the United States and Canada was about 22 tons of the product. 22 tons is the capacity of one semi-tractor trailer container, spread out in thousands of shipments around the country. Very hard to find, very high profit margin. Now, transnational connections are something that I think Dr. Berliner is going to talk about too. Do they exist between organized crime groups? Is it a big web of big web network? Well, it is in terms of transactions. I don't think there's a big global or hemispheric plot to work together and coordinate the drug trade or any of the other illegal trades that they're involved in. But the groups are local and fragmented, but they do business with each other, but they can quickly undo and redo deals all the time. But of course, it crosses borders in a very networked way. Cooperation with terrorist groups from outside the region, always a plausible scenario. You can't ever rule it out, and our intelligence agencies should be paying attention to it. If routes are used to smuggle goods and people, they could also be used to smuggle goods who want to do harm. Routes through Africa to Europe for smuggling drugs and other things could include, right now, be including Al-Qaeda-linked traffickers getting some of the profits. But you don't see a lot of examples of actual plots that have been uncovered. The most famous one, perhaps, is the one with the used car dealer in Corpus Christi, who thought that or maybe was told by the Iranian Quds Force to go find the Zetas and ask them to help kill the Saudi ambassador here. He never actually made touch with the Zetas, he just found a DEA informant instead by mistake. So those are some of the main trends. I would like to talk about how you confront organized crime, but I'm not going to. I would just leave you with one thought. I think that the real oxygen that organized crime is breathing right now in Latin America and most of the region is its corrupt links with the state. It cannot survive if it has an adversarial relationship with the government in the area where it operates. Too often, that relationship is like this. It has to be broken, whether by internal controls or ideally by getting those corrupt officials working with organized crime out of the government and hopefully into jail. If you're not doing that, when you follow the money, when you follow and when you follow the links of criminality, you're ultimately going to lead right back to someone whom you thought were your best friends in this fight. You've got to clear them out. And that's an abrupt way to end, but I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. Dr. Williams?
I am glad I am going to stand up because, as you can see, I am vertically challenged. So I was wondering how the people in the back were going to see me, or you were going to have to go like this, or the table was talking to you. Problem solved. First of all, it is an honor to be here. I want to thank Congressman Farr for inviting me. His staff that has been absolutely fabulous in ensuring that I am here without snow, although it's very windy, and obviously to the panel and the moderator. And you, the audience, and particularly my students at GW. What I am going to do, we heard in detail, see? That's what happens. Did you hear what I said before? Yes. Okay, don't ask me to repeat it, okay, good. Now. See, the vertically challenged. Okay, there we go. Thank you. Now, Adam talked to us in great detail and beautifully done as to the cartels. They are there, they exist. But why in Latin America and why this happened? That is what I am going to address. And in very broad strokes, I am going to address what I consider the 5 factors that have allowed the formation, the growth, the in-country growth of the cartels, the intra-regional expansion, and the global expansion. And I agree with Adam. This is not a complot that they are working together cohesively everywhere in the world. But you are going to see that when I speak. The factor that I am going to address are: 1, is the dirtiest little secret in Latin America, secret that everybody knows. These governments are not against violence, against drugs per se. They are against violence. Then we have the other little secret, seldom mentioned, which is the internal displacement in Latin America that has been contributed and aggravated tremendously by violence. Then corruption, collusion, and looking the other way by the powers that be. Then the cartels. The largest ones have become, in my opinion, transnational criminal business enterprises that operate on the principle of return on investment. And then what I consider the new normal. And the new normal is the one that really frightens me. Let me begin with the violence. The cartels did not invent violence, gruesome violence in Latin America. That has existed in Latin America ever since colonial times. What happens in Latin America is because the judicial institutions and the governmental institutions, whose primary responsibility is to take care of the personal security of the individual, of the citizens, are traditionally so weak. Latin America as a whole has resorted to what I call the personalization of conflict and the privatization of justice. By personalization of conflict, I mean since I cannot go to a judicial system that I can trust to get fair and impartial redress of grievances, then I have to handle my problems personally. And since I have to handle my problems personally, then I will have to do whatever I need to do in order to solve the problem. And that is why I privatize violence. Either violence done by me directly or by groups acting on my behalf. And that you can translate at the state level. When the militaries in Latin America cannot do something because either they lose support by the US or the press is going to give them a black eye, then they form militias. And the militias do what the militaries cannot do. And particularly in the case of Colombia, there was a Faustian bargain when they founded the PEPE, the people persecuted by Pablo Escobar, to eliminate the Medellin cartel. Then the question that I asked was very simple. Given the history of Colombia, the violent history of Colombia, what is going to happen when this group, with help from the US, eliminates Pablo Escobar, where they are going to go? Well, the PEPEs eventually evolved into the Autodefensas Unidas de Colombia. So violence exercised by the cartels is not something new. It's something that is there, and that is what the governments oppose, and the governments try to counter, not the drugs. When we talk to the violence, and Adam mentioned this, we need to talk about the invisible barriers. I am coming down with a cold, so excuse me. The invisible barriers. And Medellin, for example, the government in Medellin wants to tell you that Medellin is a far safer city than it used to be. But the question is, don't believe the propaganda. Just look at what is happening on the ground. Medellin is really a very insecure city because it's divided in quadrants, and it's by the police dividing it in quadrants. It's divided by the different gangs in the invisible barriers. And if you cross from one gang territory into the other, then you are going to be in serious problem. So be careful as far as that when you go to the my beautiful hometown, okay? Be careful about that. Now, what happens with violence is that violence is regretful, and violence is countered when it is in the areas that the government needs to counter. Meaning when the blood is spilled in the fancy neighborhoods, the government moves in and brings peace. But when those who are not supposed to be protected by the government, meaning the low people, then the government really does nothing. In Medellin today, there are 6,800 homicides in front of the Fiscalia. And you can rest assured that the Fiscalia is not going to lift a finger to resolve any of those crimes as to who committed them or for what. Now, it's because of the violence that the Commission for the Reform of Drug Policy that Fernando Henrique Cardoso, the ex-president of Brazil, Ricardo Lagos, Cesar Gaviria, Vicente Fox, all of them are in, is because they are convinced that this war on drugs will really begun against the Medellin cartel. And I have a question. If Medellin cartel, if Pablo Escobar has not made the mistake of assassinating 2 members of the leading family in Medellin, my family, maybe the government in Colombia would have dealt with the Medellin cartel differently. But nobody in Colombia had dared to take against anybody of the 20 families. And when Pablo made the mistake of going against the 20 families, then all hell broke loose. So when you hear that the government is on a campaign to control the violence, look who is being helped by that campaign. And one thing that is happening with the Commission for the New Drug Policy is really not to get rid of drugs, and that is what we are seeing in the region, a movement to the personal dose, the personal use, is really to tone the violence down. And we have the case of Uruguay, in my opinion, the most civilized country. Sorry about those from Brazil or Colombia, wherever you are. To me, Uruguay is the most civilized country in Latin America. Mostly middle-class country, so forth and so on. Uruguay was extremely concerned about the violence being brought in from Argentina. And what did they say? Actually, they say, send them to Paraguay. We want to keep the money. And this exercise and the statization of marijuana, not cocaine, not heroin, marijuana is going to go because the state is taking control from the seeds to the plants to the production, so the whole shebang. So it's going to be very interesting how that plays out, because that may be a new model in this whole area. If we move from the violence, the other little secret that I said is the internal displacement. Internal displacement exists not only in Colombia, but when the violence gets to an area, then the displacement begins, and the displacement can be colectivo or gota a gota. Colectivo means when a whole block or group of blocks in a city get the notice that they have to leave by such and such time because this criminal group or that criminal group or that trafficking group is going to move in. Gota gota is when a family goes in and finds the note on the door, or a neighbor come in and says, you have to leave by 6 o'clock because somebody's coming in. This is what is happening in Medellin right now, in the Colonia San Javier, in Pio XII, and also in the Colonia Nororiental. And what happens to these people? These people are dispossessed of the land, rural lands, homes, work. They have no documents. In Latin America, you cannot live without a document. I mean, that's just it. In Colombia, you have to have 4, okay? In order to tell the authorities who you are. So, they have no documents, they have no way of making a living, they have no place to go. What do you think you are going to do? If a trafficker in any way or a criminal gang comes to you and says, hey, look the other way, or make sure that something happens here and you don't say a word. Okay? It's very easy to be moral when you have a full stomach. Now, when I say that, my students and the people that I spoke to said, oh my God, you are for the cartels. No, 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 no. I am not for the cartels. As a matter of fact, I am extremely conservative, will you believe it or not? Extremely conservative. But that is something that you have to keep in mind. You have to look at the problem from the people who have the victims of the problem, and also the people who have been the victimizers. Now, when we look, as far as internal displacement, Colombia has between 2 and 4 million internally displaced. I think it's a huge disservice from some politicians in Colombia to call those people internal migrants. No, no, no. Migrants imply that at some point you have made a decision to move from one place to another. Displacement means that you have been forced in order to move from one place to another. Now, Adam mentioned this, corruption and collusion. We can discuss this back and forwards and left and back. These cartels, these organizations could not have been formed, grown, and expanded if the powers that be had not either accepted the money. Plata o plomo, I think, is the biggest excuse. Not everybody had a revolver to the head and said, you do this, or sign this paper, or do this. Actually, plata o plomo was the exception. But we have to make that. This easy money, and money that has rolled out in Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, all the while. This money has bought power, has bought influence, has bought elections, and has bought social positioning. And needs that corruption and that collusion. And this is something where my Colombian family doesn't like me very much. Because I asked them a question one day when and 7 people in the family were assassinated at the Medellin cartel. But I asked them, if you guys have been the ones who invented El Negocito, which is how it is known, the little business, if you guys had invented the Negocito, how big a problem will this have become? Anybody want to figure the answer? I have lived too long in the US, so you go and figure that one out. But corruption, they cannot flourish. And I mean, you can set up all of the corruption commissions that you want, but if you follow the money, if you follow who is behind who, you are going to go pretty high. Okay? Now, all the money, with all of the corruption and all of the collusion, what these organizations are really transnational criminal business enterprises. They operate like any business based on return and investment. These are criminal business, but there is another little secret. The traffickers are the only millionaires and multimillionaires in Latin America who have not forgotten where they came from. They have founded hospitals, schools, housing, roads, you name it. Communities where the government was never before, the traffickers were in, and they became the government of the government that didn't exist. And they did it the smart way. They did not begin at the top level because they couldn't become presidents of the country or govern the country or this or that. They began where it counted at the communal level. And that is why if we are going to change this, we are going to have, as Adam said, break the corruption cycle, but break it at the communal level, because this is where these people have the power. That takes me to the new normal. And this is what concerns me. In Latin America today, being corrupt is not considered a shameful thing to be. Actually, you can be called a bobo and stupid. They use other words that I am not going to say here because there are ladies and gentlemen in the audience. But you are considered not to be smart, not to be an avispal, okay? So that acceptance, and unless these people, the heads of these organizations and members of these organizations, are quiet, they don't play the radio, they don't do the mariachis at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they don't spill the blood in the neighborhood where the blood is not supposed to be spilled, that means Las Lomas del Poblado in Medellín, Chia in Bogotá, Las Lomas de Chapultepec in Mexico, you name it, Miraflores and Isidro, you go one the other after the other. As long as the blood is not spilled there, as long as the powers that be are not upset, as long as the name of the power that be that have looked the other way doesn't appear in the paper, then it's fine. Yes, when the violence comes in, as I said at the beginning, that all hell breaks loose, the commissions are named, they are formed, and everybody's going to take care of this. And in the meantime, they continue to be and enjoy the money, the employment, and the social services that these people provide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. I'm sure there's a lot of questions, so let's turn to the audience questions. That's really... Okay, I'm going to take 2 questions at a time, and I'll start here.
So you spoke about how in a lot of places these cartels, these groups are acting as the pseudo-government, providing local institutions and how that gives them local popularity. How would you, or what strategy would you recommend to try to break the dependence of the local population on these groups?
Okay, I'll take another one, and then right here.
Hi, Rebecca Bach. For Dr. Berliner, I was wondering if you could speak to your last point, the new normal, if that's going to become the way that the state is run, or like if the Westphalian state model is going to happen and cartels will take complete power, or if you think that the state can handle getting rid of the corruption and become strong again.
Let me stand up so that the table doesn't talk to you. Okay, the first one about the government. I have a suggestion for the governments of Latin America: begin governing. Very simple. Begin governing. Don't begin governing for your family, for your close circle of friends and associates, just begin government. Just begin governing. And one thing though, make sure that when you run for office, your money, people, know exactly where the money comes from. And I assure you, if that were going to be looked at carefully, with the carefulness that it requires, many of those campaigns will not be run because they will have no money. I hate to say that. As far as the new normal, many people who have studied this, and Alan, you have different opinions about this, many people who have studied this, they see a progression that the cartels are going to become what the mafia became in the US. That the mafia became integrated in the community. They use mostly the mafia in New York, the Gatis, and so forth and so on. I doubt it very much because Latin America is not the US. We Latins are passionate people. We Latins believe with a passion. So given the structures and the history of Latin America, I don't see that happening. What I am happening, and is very frightening to me, is that these people are going to continue making and making and making inroads because they are really now institutionalized. They are part and parcel of the institutions. And I will not be surprised if someday a president in Latin America is elected, that they say, well, this guy has connections with the mafia and so forth and so on, and people are going to say, so what, he knows how to make money. Sorry, I cannot give a more, what, normal, less passionate response? I don't know.
She is Colombian after all. Okay, Adam?
Well, sure. I mean, on getting the state into areas that don't have a state, having a government govern, it's hard to convey if you haven't really been there. If you're in Medellin and you look up both hillsides on the east and west and realize that the police don't really dare to go there, and the roads aren't paved, and if people have electricity, it's pirated, and they've all had to build their houses themselves. That's what we're talking about with state neglect. Same thing happens if you're on the beach in Rio de Janeiro and you have a nice view of the Rocinha favela right above you. There, you know, there's people out there walking around with automatic weapons because nobody's there to stop them. That's begun to change a little in Rio with the pacification program, but it's still there. What do you do about it? Well, obviously you get every aspect of the state in there, not just the security forces, please, but every aspect. But even that's not good enough, because if the state is easily corrupted, you're just going to actually risk making things worse. If you want to break, oh, that's much more romantic.
It is almost Valentine's Day.
If you want to break links between, if you want to break links between the state, those links of corruption, as I said, all roads really go through the justice system. And what does that mean? I mean, the justice system is just as vulnerable to corruption as everybody else. In order to deal with it, judges, prosecutors, and investigators have to have credible security. They have to have workable caseloads, which means they've got enough staff. They have to have the tools they need. You know, if they want to know the status of a case, they should be able to look it up on a computer and not go find it moldering on the shelf somewhere. Witnesses have to be credibly protected so that they can come forward, and that includes whistleblowers within the institutions. Witness protection played a key role in bringing down the Cosa Nostra in the United States. You need a robust community of investigative journalists and citizen groups. In extreme cases like the CICIG in Guatemala, you need these international, UN in this case, prosecutorial bodies that have independence and can carry out a lot of these investigations. And, you know, follow the money. All I'll say is a quote by Lester Freeman, the character in The Wire, season 1. You follow drugs, you get drug addicts and drug dealers. But you start to follow the money, and you don't know where the F word it's going to take you.
And let me add something about the governor, about the governing. One thing that needs to be looked at, we are looking at the nation states. These are non-state actors. And you can say criminal or hostile or whatever you want to call it. And in Latin America, one of the things that you need to look at is the open borders between countries, the tri-border areas. Everybody focuses on the tri-border area, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay, fine and dandy, but there are 11 more all throughout the region. And these are called alternatively governed spaces. Yes, they are alternatively, they call it the ungoverned spaces. No. They are governed. They are alternatively governed because these people have a free hand in moving freely. And the governments really, most of them are jungle. When you go the border between Peru and Bolivia, between Peru and Bolivia, and between Bolivia and Brazil, you just compare the river. And that's it, you know, in one country to the other. So that is another area that the governments need to pay attention to. But the governments gain a lot from this. If they were really going to be truthful, avoid the government gains from this and do something. You have to look at the government first.
Okay, I'm gonna take a couple more over here.
Thomas Costa, visiting scholar now at GW University at Brazil Initiative. Considering the number of students here, I want to ask your reflections about in terms of thinking about the problems, maybe not the solution, not necessarily what needs to be done. Number one is how do, just Adam has made a very important point, the issue of the reform, change, revolution of the judicial system. And in Latin America, we only have one case that this took place. This case of Chile that took 20 years, starts under Pinochet, and it's still ending there. In terms of the whole, let's change the whole system. And some people in Brazil are saying that the whole system has changed with only one change in the law, the introduction of plea bargaining. I mean, the whole, what's happening with Petrobras is because now people are being arrested and they are being offered plea bargains. So that's one question that I want you to look, change everything, or, what are the buttons to change? The other thing also I want to ask, and maybe you could reflect, I think Adam has said, well, what we're talking here is essentially is the issue of transshipment. That's the essence of everything that we're talking about. In my 15 years working inside of the U.S. government, for me, the biggest question, I don't understand much about drugs, but I was paying attention more to strategy, was this, we have this focus on what's taking place other places in the world, and it seems that when it crosses into the U.S. border is a silence. We don't see anything until the last mile. And the prevailing strategy in this country is to take down networks. And it's, you have the three levels of government fighting each other, when to take down or not. So I would like to look at this elements of strategy. One is, push several buttons, or, what are the important buttons to push? And this contrast between, what is our internal dominant strategy versus what we think should be strategies for interdiction in other countries, so especially in Central America.
Thank you. Well, that was two, but I'm gonna take another one right here.
Hi, I was wondering if you have any recommendations for changing neighborhoods one at a time. So are there any local level strategies to implement that don't come from changing the system from the top down?
Sure. First, Dr. Costa makes some very good points. There may be some areas of judicial reform that bear more, that give you more bang for the buck than others. And to be honest, I'm not the person to ask exactly what they are. You mentioned the case of plea bargaining, which is a key one. I would say that still, I would return to that theme of protection though. If somebody's going to actually plea bargain in a place like Colombia and be what they call a sapo or a snitch, then they and their entire family need protection, very much. And that has not always been in the offing, even in the cases where it's worked. On what happens inside the United States, this is obviously the DEA and to a great extent ICE and FBI spend a lot of their time trying to figure out what the networks look like. We know that it's not a national structure. We know that it's often, some group or groups will control key hubs like Chicago or Atlanta or Denver. I don't think we've spent enough time or enough resources actually going after those organizations and probably their links with local government in those areas. Too often the focus has been on going after the little guys. I think that's changing, but it's still been going after users and small-time dealers who do commit the most nuisance crimes, and not enough going after those national networks. And of course the corruption that might be allowing. There's a great piece, where was it? Either Rolling Stone or GQ of all places, about Laramie, Wyoming, and how the local police there were knew about this one guy who brought heroin to the town. And he had his own connections in Colorado, and he would just go back and forth. And the police knew about it and took a while, but they finally took him down. The neighborhood by neighborhood approach is important for making people feel safer in their neighborhoods. That's community level violence prevention initiatives, everything ranging from night basketball to street lights to just people banding together to getting community police and reducing response times and getting real-time data about where crimes are. All that stuff is important for quality of life, for making neighborhoods livable. It probably doesn't impact as much the operations of narco-traffickers or the larger organized crime groups. It makes it harder for gangs to operate in the brutal way that they do, and it reduces extortion, but often the same amount of drugs will end up passing through a place that has more local level, neighborhood level anti-violence. But that's still, don't pursue it, it is extremely important, and I'm glad to see it's a big part, apparently, of the big 2016 aid request for Central America.
Let me give you an example, thank you. Let me give you an example that I believe addresses both questions. Does everybody see me or are you clicking your hand? Okay. Let me do this. Let me give you an example that I think addresses both questions. There was this little town in Colombia called San Juan de Arama, in the area where the FARC was extremely powerful. And we owe the miracle of San Juan de Arama to an enlightened USAID director in Colombia, when the Colombian government asked her to donate the money to build a road in that area, in the area of San Juan de Arama. She said, I will be happy to build the road, but I want to ask the community what the community really needs the road, and where does the community need the road. They went to San Juan de Arama, they asked the community, and to the astonishment of the representatives of Bogota, the government, the Minister of Transportation, the community said, we want a school and a clinic. When the USAID officer asked, what do you want, the school and the clinic and not the road? They said, we want the clinic so that the babies are born hygienically and they spend their first years of life, and everybody here has basic medical care. And the school so that the FARC does not recruit the children. The USAID built the clinic and built the school. And interestingly enough, the recruiting of the FARC in that area declined dramatically. Now, San Juan de Arama today has other problems, but that is one of the cases where a strategy was taken to the level. What was the strategy was development, but what sort of development does the community need? And if you want to implement one strategy, I think it behooves you to ask the recipients of that strategy if what you are doing is right for them. It may be right for you, but may be totally wrong. And that is what the Latin American governments get done. They have been onto this and a security strategy, and a military strategy, and a moral strategy. Drugs are bad, yes. I don't smoke, I detest the weed stinks, okay? I don't smoke, I don't drink, I am square here, but I am telling you, there is something very attractive in some people about that, because if you remember correctly, the first controlled substance was the apple. What the slithering thing told Eve, don't touch it. And she decided to go for the fruit of Eden. There are many human beings have been doing the same. We are not going to correct human nature. What we have to do is work with human nature and give human nature what human nature wants, not what we think it wants.
Can we take a couple more? Two more, okay. Okay, right here, and the back.
I would like to know a little bit more information about the role of NGOs in Latin America. Are there any particular NGOs that are working towards improving the community economics, creating more opportunities for Latin Americans other than becoming involved in cartels?
So as Mr. Anderson mentioned, the large amount of money coming into the...
Come on.
Speak up, please.
Come on, I am getting old, so come on. It's going to happen to you guys too.
I was just gonna ask what your recommendations at the policy level are for the Alliance for Prosperity in the Northern Triangle that's supposedly coming into play in the next year or so here. So as an implementer myself, I work with a USAID contractor, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on where this money should be going, if it should be flowing through USAID, other agencies, and what strategies we should be thinking about.
Okay, I know there is a robust community of NGOs in just about every city and every country working on, community level economic development. A lot of them are working especially with that need population, those who neither study nor have jobs. It's not really my area of work, so I'm sure I'd miss some very big examples, but Viva Rio or Afro Reggae in Rio de Janeiro, sometimes the Fundación Mi Sangre, founded by the musician Juanes in Medellin, but there are many, many others. I'm probably missing the main ones. On the Obama administration's $1 billion aid request for 2016, very briefly, I've worked on Plan Colombia, the Merida Initiative. This is the first time I've seen an aid package, a big aid package introduced for Latin America, the majority of which will not go to the security forces of those countries. I think I've kind of, yeah, okay. That will not go to the security forces of those countries, which is a big deal. Now, the $1 billion breaks down more or less with about 80% going to USAID. Did I get that right? Yeah, about 78% going to USAID for some large-scale development programs, which may or may not trickle down to the poor people. A lot of money on things like education, a lot of things that we hope will be community-level violence prevention initiatives, and a lot of judicial reform, which is all very important. And at the current levels, we absolutely support those levels. We have to wait for USAID to come out with its request for proposals to see whether they're actually following the recommendations that I laid out here. Another 20%, most of the rest is carried out by the State Department's Narcotics and Law Enforcement Bureau, which has been actually the #1 source of most aid to Latin America in the past. About half of that, 20%, is things that, with oversight, are worthwhile. A lot more judicial reform, a lot of community policing, and some of the other things that I've talked about here, internal controls. The other half, though, about 10% of the package, plus another 2% or so that goes straight to militaries, I am less enthusiastic or enamored of. This is the stuff that's sort of setting up vetted units, setting up border security units to send migrants back to their places of origin, programs that measure success more in terms of hectares or acres eradicated or kilograms interdicted or kingpins arrested, instead of how many more people feel safe and prosperous where they are. But on balance, an 85% USAID and civilian package is an enormous step, and I think we have to recognize that.
I think that for the first time, the US government is looking at this the correct way. We are not going to shoot our way out of this problem. We have to go with the civil society and try to strengthen the civil societies in Latin America to the organizations that we have here. As far as the NGOs in the particular countries, the ones that I am the most familiar with are those in Colombia. I can give you my card and I will be happy to send you a list of those. But one of the things that the power that we have to do is just realize that these NGOs are not communists, they are not socialists, as they are called, they are not traitors to the country, they are trying, as Adam rightfully said, they are trying to help the dispossessed, the people that have not been dispossessed. Now, I realize that some of the comments I have made, you guys probably think that I have a bomb in my suitcase. No, I don't have a bomb. But one of the things that I insist that this government and governments do is pay attention to those who didn't have the fortune of being born with my last name. To them, they owe governance.
Okay, that's it. We've run out of time. This has been a terrific presentation. I want to thank both speakers.